Welcome. This is the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinscoe, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, Forbes contributor, and general explorer of the service and experience space. The thing I'm really interested in is how do we create organizations that produce better outcomes for both their customers and their people. This podcast has been running since January 2011, and so we have a big archive to explore. Check out the archive at adrianswinscoe.com. That's enough from me. Let's get into the interview. Before we get into the podcast, I want to give a big shout out and thanks to the folks at Pega for sponsoring my podcast this month. Now, we are fast approaching Pega World Inspire, which is Pega's annual conference that will be held at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas from June the 11th to June the 13th. This year, it's going to be an in-person event for the first time in 4 years. And they're going to bring together experts and industry leaders to demystify technologies like generative AI and intelligent automation. They will also illustrate how enterprises can practically apply these technologies to turbocharge productivity, improve low-code app development, and optimize customer engagement. Now, check out pegaworld.com to find out more, and hopefully I'll see you there. Shall we get back into the interview? So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Tiffani Bova, who is the Global Customer Growth and Innovation Evangelist at Salesforce, no less, and also a Wall Street Journal bestselling author, or the Wall Street Journal bestselling author of Growth IQ, and also, excitingly, an author of a new book that she's just about to tell us about, but not right now. Hello, Tiffani. How are you? Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Perfect. Now, Tiffani, I always ask people at the beginning of these chats to sort of introduce themselves and to give me a bit of a thumbnail sketch of them and who they are and the sort of the work they do. So if you wouldn't mind, the floor is yours.
Oh boy. Okay. Let me come up with a thumbnail then. Let me think about it. So I'd say this. I've been in and around selling technology for almost 30 years. So it's been a minute I've been on this journey. I was a sales rep and kind of moved up the ranks in startups and then Fortune 500 companies, and then took over marketing and customer service or customer success. And after being a practitioning leader, then I ended up being at the Gartner Group for a decade. I was a research fellow covering the topics of sales transformation, the impact of digital on the way brands engage with their customers, and a whole lot of other things during that time. And then about 7 years ago, Salesforce asked me to join the company and continue doing what I was doing at Gartner, but do it for us. And along the way, I've written 2 books.
Nice. Now, the second book is the thing that we want to talk about. So you've just written this new book, and it's called, this is the thing that kind of like my ears kind of pricked up when I kind of read the title of it. It was like, it's called The Experience Mindset: Changing the Way You Think About Growth. And so I'm really interested to learn more about it. But so can you tell us a little bit about it and sort of who it's for and sort of what its main thesis is? Just to give us a flavor of it.
Sure. I'm going to give a little bit of history because I think the journey that I went on to get to this place where I'm writing this particular book has a lot of implications to why I wrote it.
Okay.
The first would be, I was running a call center back in 2000 to 2004, if you will, and I was had no idea sort of what I was doing. What customer satisfaction meant, what customer experience meant in that way. I was Eloqua or Eloqua, depending on how you say it. I was their beta client. I was Constant Contact's beta client. So I was trying to figure out how do I use technology, right, to improve those experiences. Now, I wasn't using those words then, right? But we can use them now. And then fast forward, 2008, I was at Gartner, and I was part of the team that made the prediction that the chief marketing officer would spend more on technology than the chief information officer. Right. And everyone thought we were crazy, but we weren't talking about tech for tech's sake. We were really talking about it around the fact that we believed customer experience was going to become that next battleground. Now, this is 2008. We're 2023, right? We're still talking about how experience can be this competitive differentiator. But as we started to watch that, and as I was advising companies, I honestly had missed what pieces and parts of the company, specifically the people, have the greatest impact on that experience, right? Because what I just described to you was a very technology-driven solution to improving CX, right? That is, let's buy journey mapping software, let's create, better portals and better online experiences, et cetera. But when I wrote Growth IQ back in 2018, that was sort of the 10 paths to growth. And the very first path in that book was customer experience. Like, live and die on the hill of CX. Customers are your true north. They should be the center of every decision you make, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And I think I had like 4 sentences in that entire chapter that said even the word employee. So it was a miss for me. It was a miss for me. So I was, standing on stage 4 or 5 years ago, and I said, look, I didn't think it was a coincidence that Salesforce is a great place to work pretty much globally, top 5, top 10, one of the most innovative companies in the world and the fastest growing enterprise software company. And those are all accolades from external, places. And I'm not the first to say it, right? Herb Kelleher has said it, happy employees, happy customers. Richard Branson said it. I mean, there's nothing new there. But after I got off stage, I went, I wonder if I could prove it. I wonder if I could prove that connection, correlation, causation, whichever word you want to use.
Causation is better. I would have it.
Yeah. And so it was a 2-year research journey that started in the US, then went globally, and then hundreds of roundtables with executives in all kinds of roles. And lo and behold, it was such good, rich content. It was like, well, I guess I'm going to have to write a second book, 1. And 2, what was uncovered from this was really a mindset shift. I was not advocating for a new C-suite role. Like, I advocated for the CMO to sit at the executive table. We advocated for the chief customer experience officer to be created. But in this case, I am not advocating for a new role. I'm really talking about it from a sense that the mindset has to shift internally in order to make experience, right, across this multi-dimensional aspect, right, successful. So that was a long answer to a very short question, but I think the history is important.
No, I think you're right. I mean, and kind of like fair play to say that you put your hands up and go like, yeah, we were doing this. It's like customer experience, all or nothing sort of thing. And then you go, hang on. There's an army of minions and kind of like things and that go behind that in order to deliver that. And you go, and yeah, I think it's an emerging kind of thing. And I think the whole employee experience and then also other parts of that, kind of not just employee, but as you say, the multi-dimensional thing. It's like, we've been talking about it for years now, but I'm really interested in the research, and I want to come back to the research, but I wanted to ask a couple of questions about the book, just the things that stood out to me when I was going through it to give people a flavor of some of the things. And right at the beginning of the book, I mean, aligned with what you were talking about, you can write, while many companies are clear on the importance of a seamless customer experience, its impact on growth, the role employee experience plays has yet to be fully quantified or understood. This is often because leaders feel that they can only focus on one stakeholder or the other, customers or employees. And I wanted to ask about that. And I wanted to ask, why is that, do you think? Kind of why, kind of like, it's only like, it's almost a bit like, it's that, or it's like a really binary sort of focus thing, rather than actually thinking about, we need to manage a system rather than just a target, if you know what I mean.
I know exactly what you mean. And I would tell you that this is obvious. Like, I'm not saying something that someone goes, my God, I've never thought of that. Like, no. I mean, intuitively, right? We get it. It's that if we get it and it's so obvious, then why isn't everyone doing a better job at it?
Sure.
And so, over the decades since, I've been in this space and technology and et cetera, we've spent billions of dollars globally on tech to do 2 things: reduce the effort of a customer to engage with the brand, right? So I remember the days of websites in 1999 and 2000. It was like 12 clicks to go buy something, right? And we knew that was probably not a great user experience. Like, let's make it 2 or 3. And then the envelope got pushed to 1 click, right? I mean, so that was all about reducing effort for customer to do what? Improve their experience.
Yeah.
However, kind of behind the curtain in the Wizard of Oz, down the golden brick road, right? Down the yellow brick road is the fact that behind that curtain is employees actually doing all that work, right? Running on a hamster wheel to say, I'm the one that actually has to do those things to reduce the effort for the customer, because there wasn't a lot of automation, right? Those orders might not have been placed automatically, et cetera. So, I think that going back to your question of why was it an either or, was customer experience was something that people could hang their hat on, right? They could say, if we invest and we improve customer satisfaction, we see churn rates drop. If we improve the experience, we see sales go up. If we, it was very binary, right? We spend this, we get this, we do that, we get that. In the employee space, it's not quite that binary, right? Like you have, well, wait a second, what is really the cause? And the underlying big overarching message from the research was nobody actually owns employee experience, where somebody actually owns customer experience.
Yeah.
And so let's go back to what I said a few minutes ago. I am not advocating for a new role. Everybody owns customer experience, but also everybody owns employee experience. But in this case, because employees have been very left behind as we've over pivoted to customer, that when you talk to a chief human resource officer or whoever's managing talent, and I'll say, who owns, employee experience? They go, well, it depends how you define it. So we go down that path and they go, well, we own pieces of it, but we definitely don't own all of it.
Yeah.
Then I go to the CIO and I go, who owns employee experience? And I define it, right? And they go, well, we own the technology part of it, but we don't own the rest of it. And then I'll go to learning and management. Well, we own this. And you know what I mean? By the time you get through everybody, you realize that multiple parts of the company own pieces of that employee experience, which means it's very siloed and disconnected and not seamless and all the things we say about customer, right? And so, the other thing we found in the research is, to your point, executives will say, of course, we care about our employees. But at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, customer comes out on top.
Yeah.
So those are sort of, a couple. No one owns it. It defaults to customer, sort of gets the majority of attention. And then the employees are sort of left to fend for themselves.
And that, I think that becomes, you talked about working or running in a call center or a contact center back in 2000, 2004. And that becomes kind of just amplified when you've got people that, I thought we'd kind of won the argument that contact centers shouldn't be seen as a cost center, but it should be seen as a value center and potentially a profit center. But that argument's it's still being made and it's still not being won. And so you're right. It's all these things about mindset, about how you view something, and do you view something as being a money pit or an investment or a resource or a hub or all these different sort of kind of things. And I wonder, it makes me think about something else I read in the book where you use a quote from Steve Jobs, where he says that you've got to start with the customer experience and work back toward the technology, not the other way around. And you go on to say that this is where most companies stumble and focus more on the technology, as you've kind of said before, rather than the vision, the strategy. And when I read that, Tiffani, I was like, hallelujah. Because it's something I've been banging on about for such a long time. The idea that a vision isn't, I don't know, a random set of kind of like 6 buzzwords that are all being kind of stitched together and go, oh, we're going to do that. Because that pretty much explains most things. A seamless, connected, AI-enabled, friction-free, personalized experience. That's not for me. I don't think that's really. It's not compelling and differentiated kind of vision. That's just a description of something that should just happen. And it doesn't really it doesn't describe the experience of the customer or the employee in kind of creating that. And I wondered kind of why is it that there's a gap? There's this envisioning and vision kind of gap in this. And well, yeah, I'm going to stop now because I could bang on about that sort of stuff for ages. But I wanted to kind of pass it over to you. So why do you think there is this kind of gap? Why do companies stumble in that respect?
Well, I'm going to go back to what you said around frictionless, seamless. You used all those buzzwords, right? I'd say executives speak like that when they talk about the customer. I would argue employees do not use those terms like, wow, the technology I use at work is seamless and frictionless and easy. I mean, that is not what they say, right? They say, I'm in the call center. They expect me based on the metric, because it's a quote unquote cost center, that I'm going to take 10 calls an hour. And because I take 10 calls an hour and there's 10 of us, right? There's 100 calls taken an hour. And so that means if 1,000 calls are coming in, I mean, you know what I mean? It's just a math exercise. Instead of saying, well, hold on, if you think someone can take 10 calls in an hour and it takes them 10 minutes to close one call because they have to go into 5 different systems to find the information, like, you know, open a ticket or start a return. I was with a company a few weeks ago in Canada, and they literally said it was almost 20 minutes for a call center agent to action a return and send a replacement. 20 minutes. So if I have to do 10 calls in an hour, that's not, and I had to do, let's just say 5 returns, doesn't work. I mean, the math doesn't work, right? And so when we looked at the research, what was interesting there was that, more than 50% of executives felt that the technology their employees were using was effective in helping them collaborate and do their job. Only 32% of employees agreed. All employees, right? Only 23% of customer-facing employees agreed. Yet the customer-facing employees are the ones, right, that are the keepers of your CX promise. They are the ones, right? If you say we are going to have the best customer service and call center, whatever, and that's your, mantra, and it's on your website, your, CEO talks about it, it's in your marketing materials, et cetera, and then a customer calls in and the call takes 20 minutes to do a return, whose fault is that? I'm going to guess the employee doesn't wake up and go, today's the day I'm just going to really make all our customers mad at me.
No, sure.
It's not what they say, right? They show up and go, I want to do a good job, but you are not setting me up for success. So if you start with the customer, by the way, I don't disagree with what Steve said in that quote you used at the beginning of this particular question. But there are very few companies who have proven to be that good at what Apple does. So take the masses, right? And everybody else, if you start from the outside in, then we end up in that situation we just talked about where it always defaults to the customer. So experience mindset, the concept of it is, if you're going to change something or do something or improve something for the customer, I want you to take a beat. Just take a beat and say, what is the intended or unintended consequence to the employees? If you can just stop and ask that question, then you'll get better and better at making sure you're not over pivoting to customer and leaving employee behind, to sort of navigate, all these systems. The average enterprise has more than 900 apps. It's over 1,000 now, actually, but I don't know the percentage on that new number, but it's over 900 apps and only 27% of them are integrated.
Yeah. I mean, I remember talking to Nancy Duarte, who is a partner at PwC across in LA, I think it was, about a piece of research that they did. And it's a few years ago, it was on the podcast about some research they did about the effect of technology. And they were saying, like, there's some, I can't remember the actual numbers, but it's just astonishing where like 75% of all technological decisions are made in enterprises without any consultation with employees or people that are actually going to be using the technology.
Correct. Well, if you look back at the stat I just gave you, you're over 50% for executives and 23% for customer facing. And people ask me, why do I think that is? And I'm making huge assumptions here because we didn't actually ask why. But my assumption would be most of the time, the C-suite does not use the technology customer-facing employees actually use. They spend the money on it. And, obviously I work at Salesforce. They spend a lot of money on it, right? But that doesn't mean they're logging into Sales Cloud or Marketing Cloud or Service Cloud, right? They get a roll-up report, shows up on their desk. It's all pretty with graphs and all of that, pipeline and forecast and how many calls and all the metrics that they're managing. But they're not sitting in the call center using the tool, because if they did that, I'll go back to when I was running a call center, we had a huge spike in churn. Now, back then I was pretty much running it on Excel spreadsheet. It wasn't pretty, but it was $130 million recurring revenue business. It wasn't insignificant. All right. And we didn't know why. Well, lo and behold, we asked the customer service agents and they're like, look, at the end of every month, we get a spike in calls because people's credit cards have expired. Yeah. So their email stops and so we go, well, hold on a second. Like, okay, how do we pull a report that says you're, your credit card's going to expire, and proactively and predictively say, update your credit card, otherwise you're going to lose service. Guess what happened? Like 90% of the call volume was dropped and we cut churn in half. But that idea came from the call center. I could not get the executive team to help me fix that problem. And so I made a mandate that everyone had to go sit in the call center for, 2 to 4 hours, 1 day a week, all the same week. By the next week, everything I'd been asking for in the call center was fixed. I mean, it's easy if they see it.
Yeah. I mean, I have this kind of like thing I've been kind of playing around with. It's a distillation of sorts. It says like, it goes, data informs people, stories move people, but experiences compel people. And that idea that you go, as you say, kind of like putting kind of like your leadership in the call center or something, so they actually see something kind of firsthand, or they do a ride along with a delivery driver, or they kind of shadow a shift in the warehouse, or kind of whatever it might be. And then you actually get up close and personal kind of with it, and you actually see things that rather than being on a report or in a verbatim or something, but you actually can like see and feel kind of something, and you're like going, yeah, now it's real.
Well, it's like, it's like Undercover Boss.
Yeah. I love that show.
It's a masterclass. Yeah. Right. It's like, it's like
a pleasure.
I literally tell everyone in my house, you have to leave, because I just start screaming at the television. You know what I mean? Like, I am all in. Like,
I wish, however, they did a better job on wigs and makeup and mustaches and all that type of stuff. It's
I disagree. Here's what I'd say. I'd avoid it altogether. It's wasted television, because no one would recognize them anyway, because they never leave their office.
Yeah, fair.
I mean, save the time.
Yeah. Just like shave everybody's hair off and just make them look kind of like, and put them kind of like glasses on with kind of...
Doesn't matter. No one would recognize them. Listen,
exactly.
I am a student of Tom Peters, who wrote In Search of Excellence back in the 80s, right?
Big shout out to Tom, who's been on the podcast here before.
Yeah. And he wrote the foreword to my book. So,
Tom's a legend.
I am blessed in many ways. It was the first business book I ever read. And then full circle, it's the last foreword he ever wrote. So, because he's retiring.
Yeah.
But management by wandering around, right? That sort of get up and wander around. You're going to learn multiple things. Like going back to the experience mindset on both sides of the coin, you're going to see it firsthand at the customer level, which tends to be where executives spend their time. But then you're going to see it from the employee level, right? You're going to see the actions of your vision, of your strategy, of your decisions come to life. And I think that's where there's huge room for improvement.
So what is this kind of, tell me, what is this kind of, the experience mindset, at its core, is it just like, is it curiosity? Is the kind of, how do people get there? Tiffani?
Yeah, it's great question. Great question. Right. And I think, look, my goal is it'll never be 50-50 balance where, everything you do for customer has a correlating something that you do for employees. But the fastest way to get customers to love your brand is to get employees to love their job. So if you're going to survey your employees, we found that, companies were capturing that data and doing nothing with it. More than 70% were doing nothing with it. So as an example, if you were doing NPS or Net Promoter Score, are you doing eNPS? Are you doing CSAT, customer satisfaction? Are you doing employee SAT? Are you doing a customer effort score? Are you doing an employee effort score? Do you have a customer advisory board? Do you have an employee advisory board? Like just pick the 5 top KPIs or ways you manage customer, and then correlate to that. Are we doing something on the employee side? And so, the first thing I'd say is do that, right? Like at least analyze, what are you tracking? Because most companies will track attrition, what jobs are open, what's in the pipeline, the obvious ones, but then they don't get into, okay, well, you're doing an NPS for a customer who just got, a return service call settled, but you could do a quick one question and ask the, call center agent on a scale of 1 to 5, how hard was it for you to do that return?
Yeah.
And then right in real time, you're going, hold on a second. Like we're getting ones across the board on how easy it is. Maybe there's a problem. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Right. And so it doesn't need to be, you ask 100 questions, like ask one. You ask customers one, ask employees one. The second thing I'd say is an employee advisory board, and not at the executive level and almost not at manager level, but at the doer level, right? The actual practitioners of using and doing what is the greatest impactor, if you will, to customer experience. So it could start with sales, service, customer success, right? Marketing, sort of those customer facing roles. And then when you make a decision to do something, that it runs through the EAB. And then employee advisory board will go, hold on a second. If you do this, it breaks that process over there. Oh, I didn't know, right? Or if you're going to do this, we've never been trained on the last thing you rolled out.
Sure.
So maybe we should train, you get where I'm going, right?
Yeah.
Those are sort of the three big ones, because I think people feel like it's overwhelming. We've been on a 20-year journey to improve and journey map customer. We've not been on a 20-year journey, right, to do all the things on the employee side. So if you have a customer journey map, you have an employee journey map, and by outcome, right? Opening and closing a ticket, placing an order, running a campaign, hiring someone, whatever it might be. And it starts with onboarding. I mean, it gets bad from onboarding all the way to I'm leaving. Like, there's not a whole lot of goodness there, right? And so for me, experience mindset is really to stop and ask that question when you make changes on effort or experience for customer, that you do the same and be much more intentional to the employee. Do things for them, not to them.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's the sort of the idea of how can you kind of, as a manager or supervisor or leader, the idea is almost like embracing the idea of like, tell me what barriers are in your way that I can help remove that will make your job easier and allow you to perform better. Because I think that's kind of like it's, and a lot of the time, and that's always the kind of thing that's really frustrated me about the whole service space, but now service and now the experience sort of space, is how many problems exist through organizations getting in the way of their people doing a good job.
That's why I said ask one question, because it could become overwhelming quickly.
Yeah.
Right. And so, something as simple as one of the stories in the book was the co-founder and former CEO of a company called Clearco in Canada, she's on Dragon's Den up there, which is sort of the Canadian version of Shark Tank in the US. And I guess in the UK, it's Dragon's Den as well. 120 person company-ish, and a double unicorn, by the way, which is 2 billion. Double unicorn, inner 30s, and the business was in hyper growth, and it kind of started to feel like, hold on, like I feel like we're losing our culture a little bit, right? Like something's going on. So she just opened up an email box. The stupid, she's used a swear word, the stupid stuff we do at, right?
Yeah.
Thecompany.name.com. And she got emails of, broken processes, or why can't we just log it once? Why do we have to? Or I want to try to do this and I have to go get 3 approvals. It was things like that, right? But mind you, it was kind of 100, 125 employees, not 5,000, not 10,000. You couldn't do it that way, right? But you could do it by group or division. And then what they did was they found the top sort of 5 complaints and they just started working down them.
Yeah.
And guess what happened? It built trust between the brand, the right employer and employee. You asked me, I told you, you fixed it. You asked me, I told you, you didn't fix it. And you told me why you didn't fix it. You asked me, I told you, now I believe that I will spend the time and tell you because you will action it. So it doesn't have to be, this overwhelming, right? Oh, we have so many things to spend money on. It's getting hard to grow. Like, the market is uncertain. Like there's a lot going on. And you said it at the beginning, right? We have to have this bimodal mentality of being able to do ands, not ors, right?
Yeah. And so, I love that kind of, that idea. I mean, it reminds me of a story that I heard about. There's like a mobile telecoms company in the UK called EE. I think they're now owned by BT. And a few years ago, they went out and they asked both their customers and their employees to list out all the kind of the problems that they can have. They had a massive long list. And then over the course of like 2 years, just kind of chipped through them, went, we're going to do that one, fix that one, and just kept everybody in the loop, kept doing massive improvements on their NPS and the NPS and everything else. Guess what? More than 80% of them weren't technical or IT related problems. It was like problems around wording and explanation and clarity and a bit of process and this bit in here and there. So it was all like easy to fix stuff that had just got lost in the complexity of a large modern kind of organization. And it's funny, I always kind of find it fascinating. Sometimes these things, it's almost like they feel mundane and sometimes banal and stuff, but they all add up. And it's like this kind of the grit, I call it, kind of like when you can do it and you listen and you make changes and you establish that trust because you show that you're listening and you care and you want to kind of act on somebody's kind of behalf. But I know also because I love stories like that, and I know the stories, the book's full of stories. So do you have any more that you can share with us that kind of shows kind of like how this experience, bring this experience mindset sort of to life? Because I think that's the thing that I really will kind of really shines a spotlight on what other people have made this mean, as it were.
Yeah, I'd say this. I think that especially right now with what we're hearing around the usage of AI and displacements of jobs, and, it's about cutting costs, or should I hire people, or should I get better at using technology? That conversation. Look, I am not an employee expert. HR is not where I have my expertise, right? I have my expertise in the moment that matters. That connection when an employee in some way touches a customer in some way. Could be the product they build, the FAQs they build, the how-to guides. It could be that, it could be call center, right? Anything at that moment that matters. But you will hear companies now saying, and I'm a firm believer of this, is that it's human and tech, not human alone, not tech alone. Brands that will do better overall will be those that master that connection between human and technology in a way that allows humans to not do repetitive, repeating, sort of mundane tasks, allow them to focus on more value-based tasks. However, that means companies have to invest in reskilling and skilling and maybe hiring new kinds of talent to fill that capability. Otherwise, you've got people who are being overwhelmed with, I don't know how to do these things, which we just talked about. And then the ever-changing customer expectation. Faster, cheaper, more availability. You know what I'm saying? You're chasing this ever increasing expectation from customer. And, overall, there are brands that do really well in pieces and pockets of it. And then you see brands really trip up on the employee side. We've seen many examples over the last 2 years of getting fired on a Zoom, or it was an email, or it was it's just not pretty, where they would never think of doing that about a customer, right? So I would say to you that you've got examples with companies like Chewy here in the US, which is, a sort of a pet store online. And, their employees will, draw pictures and send birthday cards to pets. And, there's this connection. It's sort of like the Zappos model, but for pets. And two great examples, right? You've seen retailers, the normal retailers we always hear about. You've got, the Nordstroms, and you've got, hoteliers, Ritz and Four Seasons and Marriott. And you see brands really saying now, we've really miscalculated how difficult it's going to be to recruit and maintain talent. And if you're in the service industry and you don't have people, what happens? You got to cut your hours of your storefront, or you're closed when you really wanted to be open because you don't have people to do the work. And so if we don't start to get that investment balance, you're just going to continue to, like that example you just gave of E2, ultimately, they're doing amazing work on the employee side. They understand the connection between those two things. And I think that's really important. Unfortunately, it's kind of far and few between those that get that really right. And, I wish I knew, and I don't know the number for them, but I know that when they started the effort versus when they ended the effort, the NPS and EMPS went up, but they also saw revenue improvement, churn decrease. They saw it on the monetary side as well. And I think the more we can prove out the ROI in those kinds of efforts, like in our research, in one retailer, we found a 50% improvement I mean, that's massive. In US only study, it was a 1.8 times improvement. So for $1 billion brand, it was a $40 million impact, and you can do the math in your own company. We are really seeing ROI. And I think that's where many companies will push back until they understand that ROI more clearly.
Yeah. And I think also the other thing that probably needs to get captured in all of that sort of stuff, because I was on a bit of a session yesterday, and I asked, they were talking about how they'd improved the employee experience. It was a bit of an awards thing, and it was somebody was talking about improving the employee experience and how it driven retention and kind of sales revenue and all these different things, but it also reduced churn. And I said to them, I asked the question, it's like, have you calculated what you've saved on reducing kind of employee kind of turnover and retaining kind of productivity? Because there's an on-ramp there's a cost in hire, and then there's an on-ramp in terms of productivity, and they hadn't quite factored that into their kind of their ROI. So the ROI is actually quite a complex kind of thing. It's like there's an internal thing and there's an external thing, but I think that's always been, and it still is, sort of like the perennial challenge to CX initiatives is kind of prove the ROI,
Well, there's no shortness of KPIs in CX. There's 75 or something, an average of 75 KPIs that are tracked across CX. Yeah. I mean, that's not the problem, right? But to your point, I mean, I think many times executives will try to find the exact right ROI versus saying, let's as a team agree on some assumptions.
Yeah.
And if we can agree on the assumption and then we get some numbers back, then we can shoot holes in it, right? And say, nope, that doesn't work. Or someone goes, well, no, we're going to do this. Then the team gets together and goes, did the assumption change? Like if we've agreed on the assumption, like let's give it a quarter or two and see if we can learn something from it. And if it's not the right assumptions, then keep adjusting, right? But I don't think there's a one size fits all answer. There's not here's the 5 KPIs you should track. Here's the ROI model. Like, we're just not quite that mature yet in this kind of connection. But if you have to start somewhere. And so that's why I started with those 5, right?
I think that's absolutely spot on. It's like, so I have originally having a background as an economist. And something that kind of one thing that somebody kind of taught me kind of like years and years ago was when you're making forecasts, you're building models, you're making forecasts of things, is that the forecast is never wrong. The only thing that's wrong are the assumptions that you've made, the structure of the model and the assumptions that you've made that go into the kind of the model. Because the forecast is the outcome. And I think that's to your kind of point, is that you've got to get better at sort of doing the ROI and having the discussion and keeping going. It's like the direction of travel. But I guess my point that I was going to make was that actually you can do this with employee experience. You can do it with kind of experience in a multidimensional sort of way. I think we just have to get more sophisticated about how we approach this and more sophisticated in the conversation. But Tiffani, I feel like we could probably rummage around this stuff for quite a long time. So, experience mindset. I really enjoyed it as a thing because there's like, as you say, you explained there's this big research project that accompanied the development of the book, and there's all sorts of detail in there. So I'd encourage people to go off and dive into it, because I think it's really useful. So really kind of like there's a lot of good stuff in there. But before we kind of just sort of wrapping up, just what I wanted to ask you, is there anything that we've missed that you want to highlight about the book before you ask you some couple of kind of questions just to wrap up?
No, I mean, as you said, we could keep going and going, but I think, more than anything, the aha for me, and I hopefully for the readers, is that the next time they're sitting in an executive meeting, team meeting, one-on-one, that when someone starts talking about customer, they raise their hand and ask about employee. If they do that, it's been a success.
Nice. So thank you for that. So let's switch gears a little bit. I want to, and these are some kind of questions that I generally ask at the end of these kind of podcasts, and they evolve and have been evolved over the last kind of few years. But I think we can probably agree the last 2 or 3 years being both a bit weird and also a bit challenging, and have changed pretty much everything about how we do most things, I would suggest. So what are some of the big lessons that you've learned over the last couple of years, and how are they going to inform what you do kind of going forward?
Well, I think this is where I started this conversation, right? I mean, I think ultimately, employee was not something I spent a lot of time on.
Mm-hmm.
And then, we were smack dab in the middle of a global pandemic, and employee became the number one stakeholder for continued company success, according to the Edelman Trust Barometer. First time in a decade, it had always been customer.
Mm-hmm.
And people very quickly started realizing the lack of investments they'd made
Mm-hmm.
in employee, especially as you're trying to keep a business going,
Mm-hmm.
servicing customers, selling your stuff, like shipping your stuff, delivering your stuff. Like, you need people.
Mm-hmm.
We are not in a drone automated robot world where if people just aren't working, that the world keeps going. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's not what happens. So for me, I feel like I've been on this amazing curiosity learning journey that I feel like I'm just at the beginning of. I think there's so much more to learn. And as we start to get better and better at connecting these two parts of the business, we'll learn more and more. And so I'm excited about that.
Awesome. Awesome. And so if I was to ask you to boil it all down, Tiffani, and say, what would be your best advice to someone listening in that wants to improve their customer and employee experience? What would it be? It'd be Tiffani Bova says ... complete this sentence. How would you complete the sentence?
Well, you just spent, 30, 35 minutes listening to this podcast. Every day, block off 30 to 35 minutes and go listen to your customer or go listen to your employees. And if you're a manager, team lead, don't care. You don't have to be an executive to action this kind of change. You have to block out time to learn, be curious, disrupt yourself, get really uncomfortable because we don't know the answers on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say take and block off time every day to become a master asker and then listen.
Awesome. I love that. Master asker. Oh, I love that. So one couple of final kind of questions, quick fire ones. These ones are related to the punk books that I wrote there. And just to get people's quick take on it. And so the first question is, I wrote a book called Punk CX back in 2019, and I've been asking people since then for one or two words to describe a more punk approach to CX. So, and I have gathered about 183 different kind of words and phrases to show that it's a bit of a broad church. So, Tiffani, what would be your pitch to get on the list?
Oh, I'd definitely say rainbow colored mohawk in Piccadilly in London in the 80s. That's what I'd say.
Well, I am going to kind of condense that down to rainbow mohawk. just because like what it says, just different. And it's like, only also because it's totally not on the list. But the idea that you can have a rainbow mohawk and everything that would signify is brilliant. I love that. So thank you.
But it has to be in the Piccadilly, in the 80s.
That's going to be in the brackets. Going to like in Piccadilly Circus in the 80s.
Yeah.
But the two words be rainbow mohawk.
I was in Piccadilly Circus in the 80s, and I have lots of pictures. I did not have a mohawk. However, right? It's like standing out, different, unique, right? Personality, expressive, all of those things that encapsulated it for me.
Absolutely. I love it. I mean, that's what punk was all about. Punk wasn't this thing, it didn't have to be, and thing is, you didn't actually have to do all that sort of stuff. It was punk. This is the interesting thing. Punk was more about a mindset and a way of seeing and being in the world, rather than, and you could choose to dress up in any way that you wanted, but you didn't have to, because punk was this kind of like it was like an open kind of like community. And I think that's one of the things I love about it. More a mindset than attitude, which is actually very aligned to the to your book. But the second one was related to the second book, which is Punk XL, which explores this idea of experienced leadership. And it's a very aligned to what you're talking about, how this experience is this multidimensional thing. It's not just about customer, it's not just about employee, it's about customer, employee, and stakeholder and leadership and all these other kind of different sort of things. Within the book, there's XL stands for experienced leadership. And I posit that, we talk about market leadership, technological leadership, brand leadership, all these different sort of things, but we don't talk about experienced leadership. And so what I've been doing is been asking people sort of what one company or brand do you think is an experienced leader? Who's got it kind of like knitted together? Or are you just kind of like raising the bar kind of like setting the standard, as it were?
Well, I'm going to selfishly actually say Salesforce, and not because I work here, but So hold on, and let me tell you why.
Okay.
So I've been here 7.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Before I worked here, I was an analyst, obviously, and Salesforce was a client.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to our annual event, Dreamforce, right in San Francisco. It gets a few people together once a year. In 2019, it was like 140,000. So we get a bunch of people together.
Mm-hmm.
But that was, and I've attended 1,000 plus tech events over the course of my career over the 30 years. That was the one event consistently where I left wanting to be a better person.
Right.
It wasn't about technology, right? It was about doing well by doing good. It was social leadership. It was technology leadership. It was brand leadership. Look at our trailblazer community. We have raving fans. We have people who have our character stickers and they wear hoodies and golden hoodies. And it is a community of trailblazers, kind of our terminology. And so it is an experience of a brand, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is not only working here, but the broader community and stakeholders and shareholders we serve. And so, while people don't normally like to answer with their own company, I think that it's kind of like when you think about brands like Harley Davidson, does someone have a tattoo of your brand on their body, right? Yeah. They are committed to the brand. Well, Salesforce, it might not be a tattoo, but it is in all the things that come with our brand that is very encompassing and very driven by purpose. So I would say, I think we've gotten that nailed, but I'm going to put a little caveat next to it.
Okay.
Because there's a story in the book.
Okay.
That even though we are a great place to work, most innovative company, fastest growing enterprise software company, we only stood up an employee experience team less than a year ago.
Right.
So always learning, staying curious, willing to disrupt ourselves, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's powerful. And I apologize, right, to anybody who thinks that was a very self-serving answer. But whether I worked here or didn't work here, I think I would have answered the same way. I think the brand does a really good job.
Excellent. Well, no, it's fair enough. I mean, it's like, there is no rules about who you can nominate. It's just like, you put it out there and you tell the story and you can say why. And that's it. It's up for people to decide kind of whether they agree or not. So that's kind of fair enough. So one final question. And this is one I've added more recently, because I think we could all agree, despite all the stuff that we've gone through, the world is actually also kind of like in a bit of a weird place. And I find myself kind of drinking my coffee in the morning, and it feels like I'm doom scrolling. And then so I try like, no, looking for the good news story. So I've been trying to finish all of these conversations with a bit of a good news story. So Tiffani, I wanted to ask you, what's the most interesting, positive, or exciting thing that you've seen in the last week?
Oh, in the last week. Wow. I don't know if it's been in the last week. It's been a busy week. I've been in Spain. I've been back in the US. But I would say that collectively, I am inspired by people using technology to improve the lives and democratize access to all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Healthcare, sight, hearing, being able to walk, right? Mm-hmm. Education, like access to technology, all of those things. I think there is so much more room for this leveling the playing field, right? Talent is everywhere. Opportunity is not. And so I think technology just has the power to really change for good. And unfortunately, a lot of the news is the change for bad versus what is the change for good. So I always like those stories where I can see tech changing the lives of people, no matter where it is in the world. I mean, those are the ones that get me excited and get me up, because I feel like in some small way, I play a part in it and have for the past 30 years. And so that keeps me in the game.
Can I do a bit of a plug then for something which will kind of point people to somewhere where they can find some of those stories about technology and how it's been applied in other parts of the world that might not necessarily get the media coverage that we generally see? And there's a site called Rest of World, and I think it's called restofworld.org. And what it is, it's just like journalism from all over other kind of like parts of the world, and where people are using tech in different markets for different reasons, and so like different brands and how they're responding to different market conditions, but also doing some very cool stuff with just innovation in their marketplace. And if you don't know it, you should check it out.
Great. Love that.
Right. So that's it. I'm done. I think we're good. I think you probably kind of have to run off to kind of your next thing. But I just wanted to say, Tiffani, first of all, congratulations on the Experience Mindset. I think it's a great book. I thought that it was really interesting. I really loved the kind of research and that's in it and all the stories. Thank you for sharing your story and your journey kind of like with us kind of today. And yeah, thank you for sharing your time on the podcast as well. That's been awesome.
Well, thank you, Adrian, for having me. It was really a pleasure. Great conversation. As you said, we could have kept going, so I appreciate it.
Wow, what a great interview. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. Find out more about me and the work that I do at adrianswinscoe.com. Do leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any comments, feedback, or questions about the podcast, then feel free to send me a message to podcast@adrianswinscoe.com. Do tune in again. Thanks very much.